American pressure on Israel, not Israel, while visiting Israel, and unacceptable to Israel, to the land of Israel.
Welcome to Eyes on Israel. I'm Rabbi Pesach Walicki. On October 10th, just 3 days after the Hamas attacks that started this war, President Joe Biden gave a speech in which he pledged that Israel would have everything it needed to defend itself and ensure its security. Israeli mainstream media gushed over the speech and declared Biden the most pro-Israel president we could hope for. The next day, I released a video in which I said the following:
Israel will begin destroying Hamas. And as the campaign progresses, the Biden administration, along with its worldwide apparatus, will intensify pressure on Israel to back off.
I also published an opinion piece about the speech in which I wrote, quote, Israel's most pressing need is for its own leaders to have the courage to utterly destroy Hamas without regard for the international pressure for de-escalation and a ceasefire before the job is done. Considering the pattern of Biden's policy and posture towards Israel since taking office, the prospect that the U.S. will remain steadfast in its support as Israel makes progress towards this goal is bleak. If U.S. involvement via funding, weapons, and personnel means that the U.S. has greater leverage in Israel's critical decision-making, Israel will lose from this arrangement. Consider me skeptical of any pledges that assistance comes with no strings attached. I made this prediction because of what Biden did not say in his speech, namely, he never once mentioned Qatar or Iran, the two main sources of Hamas funding. Considering Biden's policies that from day one enriched and emboldened Iran, and his designation of Qatar as a major U.S. ally, I could not foresee Biden allowing Israel to destroy Hamas if he wasn't even willing to call out the regimes that funded it. Since then, we've heard a steady drumbeat from Biden and Secretary of State Blinken that have only confirmed these predictions. They repeatedly state that Israel's not able to destroy Hamas, while simultaneously pressuring Israel to limit military operations, making this assessment more likely to be true. And a few weeks ago, the Wall Street Journal reported that Israel significantly scaled back its operations in Rafah due directly to pressure from the Biden administration. And just over a week ago, a high-profile colonel in the IDF, Ghazi Nechama, handed in his resignation. He gave a number of interviews to major media outlets. He says in these interviews that the IDF achieves victories on a tactical level, that in every encounter with the enemy, the upper hand of the IDF is there, but it doesn't translate into victory on a strategic level. He says, quote, the central understanding in the field ranks is that they want victory, they attack, they get tactical victories, but something above in the upper echelon does not correspond with what is happening below. There is a huge gap and disconnect between the plans handed down from the general staff and then what happens at the level of field instructions and commands. He went on and said that he has gathered over 15 colonels, as he says, from the heart of the action, and went to the chief of staff and were rejected multiple times. They had meetings that were scheduled and were canceled. And as of now, according to Ghazi Nechama, there are hundreds of field commanders who are frustrated because Israel is not moving towards victory. If we put it all together, we see that the Biden administration is, in fact, tying Israel's hands. Joining me now is Caroline Glick, one of the most esteemed journalists in the state of Israel, covering Israel for JNS, where she is one of their lead editors, and personally a hero of mine. I've been reading Caroline's stuff for many, many years. Caroline Glick, welcome to Eyes on Israel.
Thanks so much for having me on your program, Rabbi.
So, Caroline, as of the day we're recording this, a few days before it airs, Blinken is supposed to arrive in Israel. The United States continues to pressure Israel. And now we have this UN Security Council resolution where the United States is going to try to get the whole world to join in the pressure for Israel to accept a ridiculous ceasefire deal, which ensures defeat for Israel, which I spoke about on last week's program. What's your assessment of where we are and what needs to happen next?
So last week, Politico published an article where they were explaining that the goal of the Biden administration is to oust Netanyahu from power, that they view him as the principal obstacle to achieving their goal of a ceasefire with Israeli defeat by leaving a ceasefire immediately. I mean, Orwell said, the fastest way to end a war is to lose it. And that's what the administration is trying to force Israel into doing. And so in the Politico article, they said that initially Biden tried to achieve this goal by giving Israel a bear hug, and that this has turned into a vice grip. And what he's trying to do is trap Israel on all sides so that Israel has no option other than to capitulate to the U.S. demand for an immediate ceasefire with some nice kind of headline to it, regional normalization or something, and a reformed Palestinian Authority that's just as pro-genocide of the Jewish people as the current one is, and just to let it go so that Biden can traipse into November 5th having achieved something or another in the Middle East that sounds good. And so that's where we are right now. The UN Security Council resolution that the United States wants to bring to a vote today would give the imprimatur of the UN Security Council to this goal of the administration. And it remains to be seen whether it's anti-Israel enough to get Russian and Chinese support or not.
So, Caroline, simultaneously with Blinken coming to visit, just a couple of days ago, we get this announcement that Benny Gantz, who's really the leading rival to Netanyahu and was treated like a head of state a few months ago by the Biden administration when they flew him out to Washington. He resigned from the war cabinet. He left the Unity Coalition that was founded shortly after the war. How do you see that fitting in to this whole picture?
Well, Benny Gantz has really been acting as an American mouthpiece in the war cabinet that was established when he joined what they referred to as a national emergency government. And so every time that the United States wanted to delay an operation, he insisted on delaying it. This we saw very clearly with the Rafah operation that was delayed for 4 months, and amidst American demands not to carry it out at all. So we've seen that, and what we've seen very clearly throughout the past 8 months is that the Biden administration, whether it's through the CIA or more prominently through the State Department and Secretary of State Blinken, have been coordinating their moves with the people. If you recall, in the 10 months that preceded the October 7th invasion, Israel was subjected to mass rallies that a lot of people likened to the color revolutions that took place in Europe at the end of the Cold War, where you had a mass rioting in the streets of people calling for the ouster of the government. And we've seen a lot of meetings, open meetings between the leaders of these mass riots and Secretary of State Blinken and the U.S. Ambassador to Israel, and now of course with Gantz and his party, and with opposition leader Yair Lapid. And I think that it's fairly clear that everything is being synchronized so that Gantz left the coalition. They're hoping to oust Netanyahu from power and call new elections, as Gantz called for in his resignation speech last night, in the fall, in October, before the U.S. presidential elections. So they want to overthrow the government in the next several weeks of the summer session of the Knesset, which ends at the end of July. And if they're successful, then Israel will go to elections before the United States goes to elections. And they're hoping that they'll get a pliant, left-leaning Israeli government. And more importantly, even than the outcome of those elections, because really the polls show that Netanyahu will be reelected no matter what, is that they'll be able to transform the government from a war government into a government of national paralysis that's going to have limited powers during the interregnum between the no confidence vote that they're hoping to get in the Knesset and the elections, which will mean that Israel is defeated in the war and there's a ceasefire and we get a few hostages back. Most of them remain behind in Gaza. And Netanyahu can be perceived or presented as a failure. And Gantz is the guy who, is going to save Israel from itself or from the Biden administration or something. So that's what they're hoping to accomplish. It was a very political speech. It was a very antagonistic speech. It was a very pro-Biden speech. And so I think that you have to see all of this in the same sort of framework.
Wow, that's a bleak picture. So, Caroline, we only have about 2 minutes left in this segment. We're going to hold you over to the next one. But just to close out this topic, I'm not a Gantz fan. I would never vote for the guy. But we're at war, and all these delays and stops and starts and limiting operations really means more of our soldiers will die on the battlefield. I have 2 sons and a son-in-law fighting, who've been fighting in Gaza. Is Gantz really that nefarious a character? Can we really put on him that he's so unpatriotic that he'd be willing to lose this war?
The way that he presented it in his speech was that, well, this is going to be a war that we're going to fight for a generation, so it's not a big deal if we, don't fight it now, and we can fight it after an election. And so that's how he kind of presented it last night, as this is a war for the long haul. But of course, that's not true. I think he's misreading the situation, if you want to put a proper gloss on it, or, that he's just not, he's not the sharpest knife in the drawer. But I agree with you. Look, we also have a son who's been fighting in Gaza, and we've lost a lot of the sons of our neighbors since October 7th, since the beginning of the ground offensive on October 21st, a lot. And we're paying an enormous price. You see that the bereaved parents of fallen soldiers and the public as a whole is very, very clear that we're not going to give up on this war. And I think that Gantz made a major miscalculation by leaving. His position is not an easy one to defend, except for the tiny minority of left-wing, far-left activists that want to set this country on fire. And I don't think that this is going to succeed. I don't think that the government is going to fall.
All right, Caroline, we got to go to break. I'm sorry to cut you off. We'll be right back after this commercial break. Welcome back to Eyes on Israel. We're talking with Caroline Glick. But before we get back to our interview with Caroline Glick, let me just remind you that Israel 365 is the sponsor of this show, Eyes on Israel. Make sure to go to Israel365news.com to find our news and analysis and columns, including my writings there. Go to Israel365.com to my author page, and you can read all of my writings. All right, Caroline, thank you. I cut you off there before the commercial break. You were talking about the fact that this move by Gantz to leave the government and bring it down is probably not going to work. And I've said in some of my media appearances that even if the government falls, if you look at the recent polling and you do the math, there really is no possibility for a coalition government in Israel that would be amenable to what the Biden administration has in mind anyway. So it's really just sowing chaos to know that they're not even going to come to power from.
That's true. And it is sowing chaos because the idea here is to sow chaos to make Israel hard-pressed to continue the war. But again, I think this was a problem that the Obama administration had with the people of Israel as well, starting as early as 2009, when Rahm Emanuel, who was the chief of staff for Obama, his first chief of staff, he said that they were going to they had brought Netanyahu down in 1999 and they were going to do it again now. But what he didn't realize is that between 1999, when they brought Netanyahu down after his first term in office, in 2009, when he returned to office, Israel went through a massive terror campaign by the Palestinian Authority, by the Palestinian people, in which over 1,400 Israelis were murdered. And the mood in Israel and the assessment of what the Americans were demanding from Netanyahu in 1999 and in 2009 were totally different. So rather than succeeding in overthrowing Netanyahu, they essentially secured his position as Israel's longest serving prime minister, because the more they're antagonistic towards him, the more they pressure him to capitulate on the issue of Palestinian statehood and on the issue of strategic defeat vis-a-vis Iran, the more the public cling to him as the safest port in the storm that can't be abandoned. So the same thing that happened in 2009 through 2016 when Obama left office and he kept trying to overthrow Netanyahu is what's happening here today. The more that they attack him, the more that they try to destabilize his government, the stronger he pulls. in among the Israeli people, and the less likely they are to succeed. And that's really what's happening here. And when the stakes are so high, when the vast majority of Israelis recognize that this is a war for our national survival and that it's a zero-sum game, you can't reach a deal with Hamas, the less likely they are to succeed.
Yeah, that's so well put. And I also, I don't know if you'll agree with this assessment. I always point out to people that the media kind of obfuscates the situation by presenting polling that shows anti-Netanyahu factions in the Knesset and pro-Netanyahu factions, which makes it seem like there's some sort of 50-50 split. But some of those anti-Netanyahu factions are anti-Netanyahu, but they're to the right of him or on the right and would never agree to anything that the Biden administration wants in terms of a two-state solution and all that. And then you also have the Arab parties that would never be part of a coalition that would make monumental decisions. So this whole pipe dream that if they could switch the government, their policy prescriptions for the Middle East could be implemented by the Israeli government is just ridiculous.
I agree with you. And I think that their main problem is that they don't actually want to hear anything that they don't agree with. And so they listen to the polls they want to listen to. They speak with the Israelis who agree with them, and they ignore the overwhelming majority of Israelis who totally disagree with them. And then they base their policies on what they hear in their self-contained echo chamber that they've created. And that's why their policies keep failing.
All right, Caroline, I want to move on to another topic. We have about 7 minutes left. I want to talk about Egypt because I'm a little bit confused, and maybe you could sort this out for me. I understood that the current Egyptian government had overcome the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, and that the Muslim Brotherhood, as I've said many times in this program, is Hamas. Hamas is a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood, and Qatar, of course, funds all these Muslim Brotherhood activities. And therefore, one would think on the face of it that Sisi, the current leader in Egypt, would be opposed to Hamas. But now we discover, after the beginnings of the incursion into Rafah and taking the border and the Philadelphia corridor there, that there are so many tunnels between Egypt and Gaza that it's obvious that the Egyptians were complicit at the very least, but probably more than complicit in the arming and supplying of Hamas all these years. Why would an Egyptian government that is anti-Muslim Brotherhood be helping Hamas?
So I think that you have to look at two different stages of the Sisi government. The first one, as you said, was when they came to power. Sisi came to power in 2013 by ousting the Muslim Brotherhood government from power that was under Mohamed Morsi. Sisi himself had been aligned with the Muslim Brotherhood. He was the Egyptian military attaché to Saudi Arabia when Saudi Arabia, before the Arab Spring and all of that, was a state sponsor of the Muslim Brotherhood. And he was appointed by Morsi, the Muslim Brotherhood president, to be the chief of staff of the army and then to be the defense minister. So Morsi clearly thought that he was aligned with the goals of the Muslim Brotherhood. And then the Arab Spring happened, and the Saudis became very concerned that they were going to get overthrown by this wave, and so was the UAE and Bahrain. And the Qataris, on the other hand, were overjoyed with what was going on, and they were bankrolling the Morsi government. And so together with the Saudis, the UAE, and the Bahrainis, the Egyptian military under Sisi as defense minister overthrew the Morsi government. And Sisi was very anti-Muslim Brotherhood when he came to power. And then in 2017, Sisi and Crown Prince Mohammed in Saudi Arabia and in the UAE and in Bahrain, they declared diplomatic war on Qatar because of Qatar's support for the Muslim Brotherhood and its partnership with Iran. And the United States, under the Trump administration, sat on the fence and didn't side with them, didn't join them in boycotting Qatar and demanding that it stop supporting the Muslim Brotherhood. It closed down Al Jazeera, which is the Muslim Brotherhood satellite station that propagates jihad throughout the Islamic world and into the West, and stop its partnership with Tehran. The United States didn't side with them. And so they were kind of sitting on the fence trying to do this without U.S. support for 4 years. And then when Biden was elected, they realized that they were going to get a pro-Muslim Brotherhood American administration. So they started walking back their position on Qatar. And the first country that did that was Egypt. And so I think that you saw a distinction between Egypt's position on the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas, which is a Muslim Brotherhood terrorist organization, before 2020 and afterwards. They were the first government to end their boycott of the Qataris. And then we saw really that Sisi's son, Mahmoud, took over the border with Bedouin chief in the northern Sinai, and they've been responsible for the Egyptian side of the border with Gaza since around 2021. And so I think that what we've discovered since the Hamas invasion is that under our very innocent gaze, Egypt kind of changed sides and started acting in concert with Hamas when they had been combating Hamas until Biden came into office. And under the leadership of Sisi's son, Mahmoud Sisi, they were enabling a lot of the arms to come in. And that's why Israel was so shocked by the arms that were in Gaza on October 7th and that were brought to bear against our people in the invasion and subsequent to that. So I think that that's what happened. I think it was a response to changes in American policy about the Muslim Brotherhood, about Qatar, about Iran, and Egypt went with that. And we're seeing that expressed in a very changed strategic environment vis-a-vis Egypt. And one last thing I'll say on that, which is that when Egypt was acting as an ally with Israel against Iran and against the Muslim Brotherhood, against ISIS, against Hamas, from 2013 until around 2020, Israel allowed the Egyptian military to remilitarize the Sinai Peninsula in order to fight the ISIS forces that were operating there fairly freely. And as a result, you have a situation where, contrary to what's written in the Peace Treaty from 1979, we face an Egyptian military on our southern border that's extremely powerful, maybe more powerful than the IDF. And if things go bad with Egypt now that they're siding essentially with Hamas against us and have threatened twice to abrogate the peace treaty with us, we'll be facing a mortal threat from the Egyptian military, which of course is funded by the United States to the tune of $3 billion a year.
Wow. Okay. So that explains that answers my question about like where Egypt is. So in the minute or so that we have left, where do you see when the dust settles on all this and we have no idea what the situation is going to look like really? So I'm kind of asking you to play prophet here, but where do you see the relationship between Israel and Egypt after all of this? Because with the whole Rafah freak out, it now becomes clear that they didn't want us going in there because we would discover what they were doing. Right. Where do you see the Egypt-Israel relationship going forward?
Look, everything is contingent on our winning this war. If we don't win this war, we're going to be in a nightmare scenario with everybody. If we win this war and we project the boldness and the power and the unity of purpose that we need to project towards our neighbors in terms of demolishing Hamas, I think that they'll stand with us. And so that's why it's a moment of such enormous importance today that we're seeing what the Biden administration is doing, and we're seeing the kind of alliance system Hamas has enjoyed over the past 4 years. And we simply have to win. We cannot be in a vice grip. We have to fight to victory. And when we do that, everything becomes much less threatening, much more inviting. But everything is contingent on Israel's victory here.
All right. Thank you, Caroline. Could you just tell our viewers in 10 seconds where they can find your writings, where they can find your show, The Caroline Glick Show, which is a must-watch for any Israel watcher?
CarolineGlick.com or to JNS, where I'm the senior contributing editor, and get The Caroline Glick Show.
We'll be right back with more Eyes on Israel after these words from our sponsors. Welcome back. Bible lovers yearn to uncover the authentic meaning of the Hebrew Bible, but often feel stuck with English translations. There's so much more to discover, but they don't know Hebrew. Israel 365 has the perfect solution. Israel Bible Plus. Israel Bible Plus is a revolutionary way to access the treasure trove of Hebrew Bible wisdom, no matter where you are in the world. With a subscription to Israel Bible Plus, you'll gain exclusive access to premium video courses from top Bible educators in Israel. These scholars will unlock the secrets of the Bible and transform your understanding of Scripture. You can't find courses like these anywhere else. That's not all. Every month you'll receive a new lightweight volume of the Israel Bible in a stunning full-color design. It's not just a Bible, it's a personal study companion with space for note-taking, maps, charts, and transliterations. Transform your Bible study experience today. Sign up for Israel Bible Plus and uncover the true depths of Scripture. Your journey to deeper understanding starts now. Sign up for Israel Bible Plus today at Israel365store.com. That's Israel365store.com. A week and a half ago, on June 5th, I had the opportunity to co-host an episode of Steve Bannon's popular show, War Room. Steve had asked me to put together a lineup of guests on the topic of Israel and the American Jewish electorate. The hour special featured Ambassador David Friedman, member of Knesset Ohad Tal, and a number of other excellent guests. If you haven't watched it yet, I strongly recommend you do so. It's War Room Battleground, the name of the fourth hour of War Room every day, and it's episode 548. You can find it on Rumble, at warroom.org, or pinned to my X and Getter profiles at Rabbi PW. At one point in the special, I shared some statistics about Jewish voting history. I mentioned that while 72% of all Jews in the United States voted for Joe Biden in 2020, according to Pew Research, the Orthodox Jewish community voted for Donald Trump to the tune of 80%. And there's reason to believe that number may be even higher, but doesn't show up in research polls. As I mentioned on Bannon's show, if you subtract out the Orthodox community, which is only 9% of the total Jewish population from the original number, you find that 79% of non-Orthodox Jews voted for Biden, almost an exact mirror image of the Orthodox community's vote for Trump. Why am I telling you all this? Numbers like 80% in political polling are extreme. What such a discrepancy means is that Orthodox Jews, like myself, and their non-Orthodox brothers and sisters are not only somewhat different in our political leanings, we live in different political and cultural universes. The overwhelming majority of Jews in America, over 90%, are not Orthodox, and they are one of the most progressive liberal populations in America, while the Orthodox community is one of the most traditional, conservative, and probably the least woke you'll ever encounter. All this is to say that the Jewish community is a complex place. And since October 7th and the subsequent war that Israel's fighting, which has seen the left turn at times outright anti-Semitic, more and more Jews are feeling politically homeless and lost. Joining me now is Josh Hammer, senior editor at Newsweek, and one of the leading public intellectuals in the conservative movement. Josh, thank you so much for joining Eyes on Israel.
Well, Rabbi Wilkley, that's very high praise. I hope that I can live up to it, but it's really great to join you. Thank you.
Thank you. So you heard my tee up, and I don't know if you watched the special that we did on the Jewish electorate, but you're a prominent Jewish figure yourself. What do you make of what's going on in the Jewish community and the ground kind of shifting under the feet of so many Jews?
Yeah, I watched the whole special. Great job, by the way. Small world, right? I mean, so I was actually in Jerusalem in January. I was moderating a panel at a sovereignty conference, and Ohad Tal, the Knesset member who was part of your special with Steve Bannon, was actually on my panel that I moderated. So, the Jewish world always ends up being very small there. Look, I mean, you're asking here, Rabbi, about one of the issues that has bothered me for as long as I have been a politically a political animal, basically, which is the fact that Jewish Americans vote further left than basically any demographic group in America. There is no demographic in America that more concretely and consistently votes against their own self-interest than the Jews. And this drives me crazy. This has driven me absolutely bonkers, bat crap crazy ever since I was in high school. I mean, I've never been a liberal my whole life. Going back to high school, I graduated high school in 2007, so I kind of came up political age during the Bush war on terrorism, and my foreign policy views have shifted a little bit. But I remember back then arguing against 25 classmates when it came to, Bush-era Guantanamo Bay policy. But in any event here, this has always driven me crazy, but you're hitting the right divide here, which is the political divide is just downstream of the religious divide. When it comes to the Jewish community, do you actually believe in Judaism? Do you believe in the authenticity of Torah? Do you believe in revelation at Har Sinai, at Mount Sinai? Do you believe the 13 principles of faith from Rambam, Maimonides, our great medieval scholar? I mean, there are basic questions. And if you answer yes or no to those questions, then your political beliefs and which partisan identity and which policies you support are just going to be downstream of that, because you're actually focusing on the right divide here. I'll just say one more thing quickly here. My wife, we live here in Florida. I grew up more secular in kind of a, typical American reform community surrounded by political liberals. My wife comes from a more traditional background. She comes from a Sephardic family. Her parents were born in Israel. She was born in Israel, actually, but she was raised here. The community here in Florida where she lives, which is largely Sephardic traditional Jews, she never met a political liberal growing up, Rabbi, my wife. She when she went to college, she basically thought liberalism was this weird thing you heard about in the media. It totally never occurred to her. So when you say that there are two separate universes, you could not possibly be more spot on.
Josh, you mentioned, you talk about how we're obviously living in two cultural different universes, and obviously the culture, the politics is downstream from the culture, as Andrew Breitbart always famously said. But what this really means is that it's not a kind of gradual spectrum, that we're really talking about two opposite ends of the spectrum. And if you picture sort of like black urban women and like, I don't know, white males in Oklahoma, like we're talking about like, it's like we're all Jews, we're all part of ostensibly a community, but we're as different as those population groups in terms of our electoral behavior, which really, what does it mean for Jews now who we're hearing that after October 7th, there's all these Jews who are doing all this hand wringing, and you have students on the campuses wearing keffiyehs and leading the protests who are Jewish. But at the same time, I'm hearing rumors that there are significant portions of the Jewish community that are questioning those liberal electoral behaviors and are moving to the right. Do you see any of that? Do you think that that's real and it's going to be significant? Or do you think that these people are more committed to their progressive leftism than they are to their Jewish identity?
So the answer is both. So anecdotally, in my personal life, and this is pure anecdotally, this is not extrapolated to broader data. There was this new poll from AJC, the American Jewish Committee, that was terrible, deeply dispiriting stuff. But anecdotally, Rabbi, I can tell you that I do have family members who are not super religious, who are centrist to politically liberal. And basically down the line, they're all voting for Trump, and they're not budging an inch from this, nonsensical conviction on the fraudulent bookkeeping stuff in New York City. They're not budging an inch off that. Down the line, they're all planning to vote for Trump, which anecdotally, I hope that I can extrapolate that to the broader populace. I don't know is the answer. So if you go back to 2020, the exit polls show that Jews voted roughly 33%, give or take, for Donald Trump. Now, in Florida, where I live in 2022, 45% of Jews voted for Ron DeSantis in his reelect. Maybe the Florida community is not a perfect representation of the broader electorate. We have a lot of more religious Orthodox communities here. But I think at a bare minimum, it is reasonable to expect that Trump will get north of 40%. I'm not going to go ahead and predict that he will win the Jewish vote. Bezrat Hashem, God willing, that would be incredible. I'm not going to go ahead and openly predict it. I hope that he does. But I think north of 40% from a 33% 2020 baseline is a reasonable estimate, which, by the way, would actually be the highest vote share that a Jew will have gotten, if he can get that, in the history of polling on this. Ronald Reagan got 40% in 1980 after the Jimmy Carter years. So that's kind of what I'm thinking here, but I don't have a crystal ball, of course.
We only have 2 minutes left, but I do want to mention that your wife is Israeli born, right? And she's from a Sephardic family. And a lot of our viewers don't know what that means, but it points to something interesting, which is that this is a much more traditional, more conservative values community, even when they're not observant of the Torah law. And when people look at Israel and they see Israel as a nationalist, fairly right-wing country, even though most Israelis are not Torah observant, what they're missing in their understanding of it is that a huge plurality of Israelis are from these Sephardic backgrounds, and it's a very conservative society. So comment on that, and then let everyone know where they can find your writings, where they can follow you. We got about a minute and a half left.
Yeah, sure. So, when we speak of Sephardic Jews, we mean Jews who ultimately come from the Iberian Peninsula, Spain, and Portugal. Nowadays, the term Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews tend to get used a little interchangeably to refer to the Jews who basically lived in the Middle East, in Arab lands, the ones who were uprooted during the pogroms of the late 1940s, early 1950s, and they're oftentimes darker skinned and really are more traditional. By the way, the presence of Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews, Rabbi, as you know, is the ultimate kind of gotcha to the idiot woke leftists who call Israel this white ethno-state. I mean, my wife is considerably darker than me. When we were vacationing in Mexico maybe a year or two ago, they started speaking to her in Spanish because they thought that she was a Mexican or something like that. And it's kind of a funny anecdote, but they do come from very traditional communities. And because they had to flee these Arab lands when the Arabs committed these pogroms, they have kind of this innate common sense when it comes to the Arabs, when it comes to how to deal with the Palestinian Arabs, when it comes to dealing with the Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas, Hezbollah. And, it's been a beautiful marriage. We're actually going to raise our future children, God willing, with Sephardic customs as well and so forth there. So I'm kind of all in for the Sephardic cause, even as an Ashkenazi myself. But in any event, it's been a really nice conversation, Rabbi. Thank you for having me.
We've got 20 seconds left. Where can people find you?
On Twitter, Josh_Hammer. I'm on Instagram, Josh B. Hammer. And my two shows, The Josh Hammer Show and America on Trial with Josh Hammer.
Thank you so much for joining us, Josh. We're going to have you back. Look forward to it.
Looking forward to it.
We'll be right back with more Eyes on Israel after this word from our sponsors. The Israel Bible is like no other Bible you've ever seen. The Israel Bible combines the original Hebrew text with clear, accurate English translations that bring these ancient words to life like never before. It is filled with beautiful charts, maps, and illustrations. The Israel Bible is vital for anyone looking to deepen their understanding of the Bible. To purchase your Israel Bible, go to getmyisraelbible.com today. Welcome back. Israel is fighting a multi-front war for survival. One of those fronts, one of the most critical, is the information war. Mainstream media and globalist political powers like the Biden administration, are constantly lying about Israel, misrepresenting the facts, and pushing narratives that are carefully crafted to support their godless left-wing agenda. And that is why this show was created. Executive producer Harry Oates, as well as Robin Parker Sigg of the Real America's Voice Network, understood the need for a show that would clear the air and present a weekly island of truth about Israel in a stormy sea of lies and misrepresentations. We are grateful to them for providing this platform. Eyes on Israel has now been on the air for more than 3 months. All indications are that our audience is growing, and growing even faster than expected. I want to thank you, our audience, for being a part of this growth, for spending time with us each week, and for spreading the word about the importance of what we are doing. Please tell everyone you know about this show, and be sure to share the segments with people you know who may only be hearing the lies the media tells about what's really happening. This show would never have aired if not for the generous assistance of Ann and John Stacy, Corey and Christy Ingram, and Mike Isley, a group of Texans, all Christians, who believe in the mission of Eyes on Israel and generously provided the seed money that made this show a reality. Ann, John, Corey, Christy, and Mike, we are forever grateful to you. Now, with a growing audience, Eyes on Israel is looking for sponsors and advertisers. If you or someone you know would like to reach our growing audience as an advertiser, or if you're someone who would like to support the mission of this show by sponsoring an episode or a single segment, please send an email to me at Pesach, that's P-E-S-A-C-H, Pesach, my first name, at Israel365.com. Sponsorships can be made in honor or memory of a loved one, for a special occasion, or simply as a show of support for Israel's war against her enemies. And for more in-depth conversations, please check out the Shoulder to Shoulder podcast. You often see it in the Chiron on your screen. The Shoulder to Shoulder podcast is available on all podcast platforms. Each week, together with my co-host, Pastor Doug Reed, we discuss issues that matter to people of faith. Our guests include faith leaders, military experts, leaders of important ministries, public figures, and a range of personalities from both the Jewish and Christian communities. And Patreon subscribers to the podcast receive access to a library of Pastor Doug and I studying the Bible together, chapter by chapter, beginning in Genesis. That's Shoulder to Shoulder Podcast on all podcast platforms. One of the best-known passages in the Bible is the 3 verses known as the priestly blessing. According to the Bible in the book of Numbers, chapter 6, these 3 verses are to be recited by Aaron, the high priest, and his priest descendants to bless the people of Israel. Over the next few weeks, I'd like to explore the deeper meaning of these blessings based on a careful reading of the original Hebrew. The 3 verses known as the priestly blessing are, in fact, 3 separate blessings. In Jewish tradition and practice, the priestly blessing is recited as part of the daily morning prayer service in the synagogue. Members of the congregation from priestly families who are descended from Aaron the high priest, who have that tradition, they ascend the dais at the front of the congregation. They raise their hands and they recite the blessing over the congregation. The congregation then responds, Amen or Amen after each of the 3 verses. Each of the 3 verses comprising the priestly blessing contains 2 verbs describing what God will do to those who are being blessed. The first of the 3 verses states that God will do 2 things. As the verse states, the Lord will bless you and keep you. So he will bless and he will keep. Let's look at the Hebrew to gain a deeper, more precise understanding of this blessing. The verse is made up of 3 words. Yivarechecha, which means will bless you. And then Adonai, the Lord, God's name. And then V'yishmerecha, which means and will keep you. Now, what exactly is God promising to do in this verse? What is the precise meaning of the word blessing? The first thing God will do is bless. The Hebrew word for blessing is beracha. That's the root used here in the first word of our verse. The first time that this word, the word blessing, appears in the Bible is way back in Genesis 1 on the 5th day of creation. As the Bible states, he blessed them, referring to the fish, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the water in the seas." God told the fish that there would be many of them. Beracha, blessing, in other words, implies abundance. God blessed the fish by saying, "May there be a lot of you." More broadly, blessing is the actualization of hidden potential for good. So, for example, talking about fish, 2 fish or 2 people have the potential to reproduce, provided that they're male and female. That in and of itself is not the blessing. The blessing is the realization of this potential when a child is produced. The child is a blessing. Throughout the Bible, blessing implies abundance or multiplication of something good, the product. For example, when Isaac blessed his sons, Jacob and Esau, he bestowed gifts upon them in terms of material wealth as well as spiritual gifts. In this context, the word blessing indicates material wealth, spiritual gifts, or loftiness of status and power. Another example is the verse in Exodus, "And he will bless your bread and your water." This refers to the bestowing of plenty and prosperity, that you'll have a lot of bread and water. The second verb in our verse, "The Lord will bless you and keep you," is keep. That's how it's usually translated. But the Hebrew verb used here, shamar, is the same as the word for guarding or protecting. In other words, the word keep in English has the connotation of holding on to something as a possession, like I keep things I own. But the Hebrew verb here is not really about ownership. Rather, it means protection from harm or guarding something. So now that we understand the precise meaning of the 2 verbs in our verse, what God will do, he will bless and keep, we can more accurately understand what this blessing really promises. When we say the Lord will bless you, we mean that God will provide plenty. He'll multiply you, so fertility and abundant resources. He will give us all that we need to be effective as servants of God in the world. At the same time, He will keep you, meaning He will guard us and protect us from harm, from enemies who would seek to undermine the fulfillment of our sacred mission. This may seem like a simple idea, but it's not. Many people of faith pray to God for blessings of health and prosperity as ends in and of themselves. They ask God to bless them and correctly see God's hand in the blessings that they receive. They praise and thank God for these blessings. But all too often, they don't ask the next question. Why is God blessing me? What am I supposed to do with these blessings? So here in the first verse of the priestly blessing, we say that God will bless us with great gifts, great potential. And at the same time, He will protect us so that we can put the potential to good use. It's up to us to make ourselves worthy of God's blessings. Psalm 115, verse 9, echoes the message of our verse. O Israel, trust in the Lord. He is their helper and their shield. Help and shield describe two ways that God guarantees that His people's mission is accomplished in the long term. He has blessed us with strength and ability. At those times, we trust that God is with us as a helper, assisting us in our mission. God blesses us and gives us resources that we need to influence others. At other times, in the battle for God on this earth, we encounter forces that oppose God. Often those who oppose God are in power. And when the attacks on God's people would prevent us from doing God's work, when all we can do is fight for survival, God then is a shield. He protects us. He protects His people from destruction. He's a helper in carrying out their mission, and He's a shield against those who would hold them back. We've all been blessed by God. We have gifts and potential that can be used to build His kingdom. We must use those gifts. When we do, we are often called upon to take risks. We must trust in Him. He blessed us with strength. He'll be there to guard us and protect us when we take the field of battle. And that's what the first verse of the priestly blessing is all about. If you would like more of my biblical teachings, these teachings that are rooted in the original Hebrew meaning, be sure to order a copy of my recent book, Verses for Zion. Verses for Zion contains 77 devotional teachings, each a few pages long, that draw out lessons of the biblical text that lie beneath the surface of the original Hebrew. Each teaching ends with a few-line summary of the inspirational lesson of the passage so that you can use this book as a daily devotional to both educate and inspire you for a few minutes each day. Verses for Zion is published by Israel 365. Israel 365, of course, produces this show at the Israel 365 studios here in Beit Shemesh, just outside Jerusalem. So by purchasing a copy of Verses for Zion, you'll also be supporting this show. Verses for Zion is available on Amazon or at getvfz.com. That's getvfz.com if you'd rather not give your money to Jeff Bezos at Amazon. Thank you so much for watching Eyes on Israel. We'll see you next week.